Page 291, our hymn of invitation, first and last verses. This weekend we honor Memorial Day as a tribute to our various armed service people. We honor these military people because they stand out in both the past, the present, and the future against those who threaten freedom. But make no mistake about it, we are also involved in a daily battle with Satan. So each one of us is fighting this battle both individually and collectively against a total absence of God's influence. I've written a sermon here today called God's Plans for Our Home. The reason I did this was because there are homes all over the world that are battling just to stay a home. They're battling, and they're no different in this respect, whether they're a home made of animal skin on the barren, frozen plains of northern Siberia, or whether they're a really nice and fancy home that we live in, perhaps here in America, with all modern conveniences. I'd say these homes are headed for destruction, and our homes are part of this vast group. Some because of wars, that's obvious. Some because of famine, and it's going to become more obvious as it goes on. Some because of bad government. Some because a water crisis will hit, and they won't be able to live in a home with no water. So we do seem to surely have an overabundance, if you will, of purely physical reasons for home failure. But it goes far deeper than that. So many, in fact, that this problem of refugees and homelessness is very evident in Africa, Middle East, even in Europe, and in fact in America right now. Wars, bad government, and famine, the main causes there. But my wife and I have a certain amount of experience with home life of all different types. Since 1959, we've taught school, and my wife quit teaching on the day that she was threatened because of complete lack of discipline in one of the homes and the children that she taught. I don't blame her. Parents came up, they were going to beat that teacher up. I'm dressing up the language here. There's an abundance of attitudes like this, and children are being raised in homes like this. High divorce rates, lack of discipline for the children, a complete ignorance of parental responsibility, and certainly a complete ignorance of God. In the homes in which my wife and I were raised, so you'll know exactly where we're coming from, there was always food on the table, but there wasn't always money in the pocket. There was always love. There was always a strong family unit. There was always discipline, always guidance, and always good. Always God, and in all ways, always on the straight and narrow. In both of these homes, there was an abundance of elderly people. Now, we qualify for that name, so I'm just going to call them folks taking a nap, but we cover that too. And in our experience over all these years, just as it is in your own experiences, we've noticed that since the beginning of our teaching tenures, the main reasons for home failure in our American society have been a total absence of God, a complete decline. Barely 1/3 or fewer of our class members that we taught, because we questioned them, ever raised their hand when we said, "Do you go to church?" When my wife and I would run a home to escape to, we ran away from society and went home to escape these problems. We ran from the world and school and all that. Children would come home to run away from their childhood enemies or their problems. And children now still run home, but they don't go home to both parents. an awful lot of children, our latchkey children, they go home to an empty house because both parents are working. They go home to high-pressure video games. They go home to a lack of supervision, bad television shows, and certainly a rotten presidential campaign right at the moment. These are the same kids who are not taken to church. They're not taught to pray. They don't know the first thing about getting down on their knees and talking to God. They're never taught the rules of God. They're never given a good example by their parents because their parents always say on Sunday, I'm too tired to get up yet, and besides, if I go to church, I'll miss my golf game, or I'll miss my yoga class, or I'll miss my luncheon date. Listen to what the Bible has to say about this because God never changed his mind. So I'm going to go to the Old Testament, chapter 6, starting with verse 1. These are the commands, decrees, and laws the Lord your God directed me to teach you to observe in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess, so that you, your children, and their children after them may fear the Lord your God as long as you live, by keeping all his decrees and commands that I give you, and so that you may enjoy long life. Hear, Israel, and be careful to obey, so that it may go well with you, and that you may increase greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, promised you. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on your door frames of your houses and on your gates. I think every home in our nation needs to be for God, and they're not. Places, if you will, of spiritual strength, and they're often not. Our nation's founding fathers did their dead-level best to make sure everybody understood that this entire nation was to be founded upon the principles of God and the Scriptures. In God we trust, not in our social games and activities. Preacher visited England. This is a true story. Preacher visited England pretty much at the height of World War II. He stood in the area of London where the bombs and the rockets had come down, the V-2 rockets that came over. And he viewed a house that was still standing, but just barely. Lots of extra wood covering the holes in the walls. And he met the family who lived there. And he found them to be God-fearing, meek, and mild people, giving thanks to God for their blessings in the middle of a war. Then he traveled a little more of the country, and he got away from London, where so much damage was done. And he got out in the countryside, and he found a house that hadn't been touched. Beautiful home, setting up on a little hill, nice fences, animals grazing in the pastures. Okay? And he felt that there was a difference. The people in the war-torn house had believed in God, and the people in the house out in the country never once gave God any credence at all. Let me give you a huge secret here. The youth gangs of Evansville are growing and killing more and more people with guns. Or maybe you've done like I did and read the newspaper. If you think the New Harmony is immune from that, you better think again. Mount Vernon's not immune from it for sure. Okay? Just this past week, a truce had to be brokered between the gangs so that they quit killing each other. Wasn't the truce the same thing that was brokered in World War II? Wasn't that the war to end all wars? And we were going to have truce and peace forever and ever? Same thing is happening in the homes of our land. Parents look at me and they say, "Preacher, you're trying to blame the parents." And I point back to these people, and I have been accosted that way. Parents, we didn't make these rules, God did. They're righteous rules. They're rules for society to live by. One of the main topics of New Harmony preachers when they get together is why is the attendance dropping in our churches so drastically? I can understand this morning. We have an awful lot of folk traveling. We have some ill. We have some away at seminars and things like that. But the real truth is, why isn't the rest of the town flocking in? What's happening here? We're not planning on having any kids again, are we, anytime soon? I'm not going to be surprised like I was the first 3 times. I point this out to you because I don't think that we're so much responsible in terms of just our own households. We're responsible for our household, being an example to every kid out there who looks at us. So they drive by and they see us at church. Maybe it's folly to unload an entire sermon like this on a few people who probably will have no more children. But at the same time, maybe it's not. Because I think the seeds of God need to be planted by us, and we can't give up the ship. If we're down to just a very few people, if we're down to almost no one in this church, we've still got this responsibility over time. Bear with me. I think that in spite of the advancing ages that we have here, I think that we are still very influential, and our church is influential in its own population right here in America, because we've been called to this task by God. In your magazine today, The Lookout, okay, it talks about crossing lines, generational lines. Mostly it talks about young people crossing lines to the older people, teaching them how to knit and things like that. But I think it's time that we cross those lines in reverse, that we took the young people and we said, if you're afraid in your life, and if they say no, you say, try this, and show them how to pray to God. I think it's time for us to pack up all the things that don't matter and throw them away, and to really do the things that do matter in America. I think we're being called to this task by God. I put a lot of thought in this sermon. Mostly I put thought into how I can cut it down in size to still manage and say what I wanted it to say. I think we need to do our dead level best to please our God, to be sure at all times to do the following things so that our kids and our grandkids and our great-grandkids can see and hear God's plan taking shape by people who really know what that plan is. I urge each one of you to maintain spiritual strength. Share your influence with the kids in your life and the kids that you can touch otherwise that live in other homes, by teaching and preaching and living love as God and Jesus define love. Learn your Bibles well enough so when it comes time and the kids need a Bible example, you'll know it from memory on what to teach them and what to say to them. You know what that preacher found in those war-torn houses that was different? In the war-torn house in the middle of London was a sign over the doorway. And here's what it said: Lord, make my house thine until thine shall be mine. Right? Make my house, make thy house mine until mine shall be thine. Right? So we got to come up with this idea of living with God and a nice, undamaged house out in the country. They never went to church and they didn't practice it. Make sure God's included in your battle. We've got a battle here. It's not going to be easy. Make your house a place of divine truth. not just lip service, but actively. What's a modern parent? They have 60-inch televisions. They buy their kids laptop computers. They buy their kids cell phones. And they never once deny the children time on any of those. So children come to us. And the very first thing my grandson does after school is sit down with a telephone and works his thumb. He never takes his eyes off of it unless we stop him. I cannot find the TV control. It's somewhere in a pile of junk in the living room, but we aren't sure yet. So why would they hide the TV control? So Grandpa cannot change the channel and they can watch their favorite cartoons. Let me tell you something about those. If you have not watched some of those cartoon shows that are on regularly on television until late at night, you need to, because some of those are conveying ideas that are completely anti-God in every way. I think that we get older and we divorce ourselves from these things. We say we're not ready to have children again, but we affect children, and perhaps we affect ourselves too. Our house needs to be a divine house. You know what modern parents do? I've had this experience so with my wife, so with any school teacher, bus driver, anybody that works this way. Modern parents are good at delegating. They send their kids off to have them raised by coaches. They delegate everything out, even blame, because they're never to blame. They always blame somebody else. They delegate everything but God, and they don't have any knowledge of God, so they don't delegate Him. They just don't mention Him. Make sure that the divine truth that you teach and preach and practice in your own homes is the divine truth of Christ. I don't think any of us are exempt. I don't think it matters that we're coming down on 80 years old. I think it makes a bit of difference. We have a responsibility. What's the one thing that got to us keeping 4 children over 6 months? Shall I tell them? We discovered we're old. We discovered we're worn out. We discovered that we didn't have all kinds of energy. I can't keep up with the kids, but perhaps I can have the children keep up with God. See the difference? Now our neighbors look at us, our family looks at us, we still have this responsibility. Not only do the children need to see this, they need to hear it, they need to understand it, and they need to be encouraged. So do their parents. I'm reminded of the story of the old farmer. He and his wife, they were neither one very well educated. They managed to put their son through college. Okay? So they go to his graduation and they're sitting down there, and the son gets up and he walks across the platform, gets his diploma. And the old gentleman turns to his wife and he said, "Ma," he said, "we've worked hard all of our lives. We've raised a lot of crops, but that there is the best crop we ever raised." Okay? Now, don't we have to do that in the church to make sure, even in our own families, never to give up hope, always call on the Lord, and always make sure that those children are the best crop we ever raised, because I'll tell you what, our nation's in doubt if we don't. You ever come up against a riot? I kind of taught on the south edge of Chicago, And my wife and I made it a habit to go into Chicago. We liked it. There's lots of stuff there to do, and mostly it was free. So we go into Chicago, and we're coming down one of the streets on the south side of Chicago, and there's a race riot going on, and we sort of drove into it without realizing it. We managed to get out of it, to escape by a side street. We came down to her hometown of Carbondale, Illinois, and there's a huge riot going on, and we don't realize it. It's 11 o'clock at night, and we with our children are on our way home, and I come down the very street the riot is on, police with axe handles beating on people. We escaped that, fortunately. But those things happen in America. And I think they happen at least partly because so many Christians have given up. It's time for us to dig our heels in spite of the tiredness, in spite of the aging, and say, we believe in God and we believe in Jesus. Let us teach you about him. Help. Come on, help. Help God to teach others what it's like to be in him. We are setting a new record today on time. I'm done preaching. Okay. There are lots of jokes you can make about things like this, but you really need to say the truth. The truth is, yes, we need to hear these things, and yes, we need to do them. I invite you to Christ. If you're not a member of the kingdom of God, come to Jesus. Take our hymnals, turn to page 291. Be singing first and last verses.
Jesus calls us to the tomb of our lives, and rest asleep. By day his sweet voice soundeth, say, Christian, follow me. Jesus calls us by his mercy, Savior, may we hear thy call. Give our hearts to thine obedience, serve and love thee best of all.
Father God in heaven, dismiss us with your blessing. Watch over us and keep us, and return us to worship another day. In Jesus' name, amen.